The wives of Henry VIII were the 6 queens consort wedded to Henry VIII of England between 1509 and 1547. The 6 women to hold the title Queen Consort of King Henry VIII were, in order, Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, Catherine Parr. A common mnemonic device to remember the fates of Henry's consorts is he divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived euro. There is also a rhyme. King Henry VIII, to 6 wives he was wedded. 1 died, 1 survived, 2 divorced, 2 beheaded. However, Henry did not divorce 2 wives, he had the marriages annulled. At the time, the laws relating to marriage were under the jurisdiction of canon law, and there was no divorce under canon law. It is often noted that Catherine Parr survived him. In fact, Anne of Cleves also survived the king, and was the last of his queens to die. Of the 6 queens, Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, and Jane Seymour each gave Henry 1 child who survived infancy, 2 daughters and 1 son. All 3 of these children would eventually ascend to the throne, Queen Mary I, Queen Elizabeth I, and King Edward VI, respectively. Catherine Howard and Anne Boleyn, the 2 of Henry's queens who were beheaded, were first cousins. Several of Henry's wives worked in at least one of his other wives' service, typically as ladies-in-waiting. Anne Boleyn worked in Catherine of Aragon's service, Jane Seymour worked in Catherine of Aragon's and Anne Boleyn's, and Catherine Howard worked in Anne of Cleves's. Henry was distantly related to all 6 of his wives through their common ancestor, King Edward I of England. Henry and at least 4 of his wives were portrayed in opera. Catherine of Aragon. Catherine of Aragon was Henry's first wife. After the death of Arthur, her first husband and Henry's brother, a papal dispensation was obtained to enable her to marry Henry, though the marriage did not take place until after he came to the throne in 1509. Prospects were looking good when Catherine became pregnant in 1510, just 4 months after their marriage, but the girl was stillborn. Catherine became pregnant again in 1511, and gave birth to a boy who died 2 months later. In 1512, Catherine gave birth to a stillborn boy, and then a stillborn girl in 1513. Finally, Catherine bore him a healthy daughter in 1516, Mary. It took her 2 years to conceive again. This pregnancy also ended with a stillborn girl. It is said that Henry truly loved Catherine of Aragon. He himself professed it many a time in song, letters, inscriptions, public declarations etc. Henry, at the time a Roman Apostolic Catholic, sought the Pope's approval for an annulment on the grounds that his marriage was invalid because Catherine had first been his brother's wife. Henry had begun an affair with Anne Boleyn, who is said to have refused to become his mistress. Despite the Pope's refusal, Henry separated from Catherine in 1531. In the face of the Pope's continuing refusal to annul his marriage to Catherine, Henry ordered the highest church official in England, Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury, to convene a court to rule on the status of his marriage to Catherine. On May 23, 1533, Cranmer ruled the marriage to Catherine null and void. On May 28, 1533, he pronounced the king legally married to Anne. This led to the break from the Roman Catholic Church and the later establishment of the Church of England. Shakespeare called Catherine the Queen of Earthly Queens. Marriage to Henry VIII, June 11, 1509 May 23, 1533. Marriage annulled. Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn was Henry's second wife and the mother of Elizabeth I. Henry's marriage to Anne, and her subsequent execution, made her a key figure in the political and religious upheaval that was the start of the English Reformation. The daughter of Sir Thomas Boleyn and his wife, Lady Elizabeth Boleyn, Anne was of nobler birth than Jane Seymour, Henry's later wife. She was dark-haired, with beautiful features and lively manners. She was educated in Europe, largely as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Claude of France. Anne resisted the king's attempts to seduce her in 1526 and she refused to become his mistress, as her sister, Mary Boleyn, had been. It soon became the one absorbing object of the king's desires to secure a divorce from his wife, Catherine of Aragon, so he could marry Anne. when it became clear that Pope Clement VII was unlikely to give the king an annulment, the breaking of the power of the Roman Catholic Church in England began. Henry had Thomas Wolsey dismissed from public office and later had the Boleyn family's chaplain, Thomas Cranmer, appointed Archbishop of Canterbury. In 1533, Henry and Anne went through a secret wedding service. She soon became pregnant and there was a second, public wedding service, which took place in London on January 25, 1533. On May 23, 1533, Cranmer declared the marriage of Henry and Catherine null and void. 5 days later, Cranmer declared the marriage of Henry and Anne to be good and valid. Soon after, the Pope launched sentences of excommunication against the King and the Archbishop. As a result of Anne's marriage to the King, the Church of England was forced to break with Rome and was brought under the King's control. Anne was crowned Queen Consort of England on June 1, 1533. Later that year, on September 7, Anne gave birth to Henry's second daughter, Elizabeth. When Anne failed to quickly produce a male heir, her only son being stillborn, the king grew tired of her and a plot was hatched by Thomas Cromwell to execute her. Although the evidence against her was unconvincing, Anne was beheaded on charges of adultery, incest, and high treason on May 19, 1536. Following her daughter Elizabeth's coronation as queen, Anne was venerated as a martyr and heroine of the English Reformation, particularly through the works of John Fowkes. Over the centuries, Anne has inspired or been mentioned in numerous artistic and cultural works. Marriage to Henry VIII, May 28, 1533 a.a. May 17, 1536. Annulled, then beheaded. Jane Seymour. Jane Seymour was Henry's third wife. She served Catherine of Aragon and was one of Anne Boleyn's ladies-in-waiting. It is strongly believed that she is the mistress who disposed of Anne, who was executed just 11 days before Jane's marriage to the king. The daughter of a knight, she was of lower birth than most of Henry's wives. Finally, a year later, Jane gave birth to a healthy, legitimate male heir, Edward, but Seymour died 12 days later, presumably because of postnatal complications. This apparently caused her husband genuine grief, as she was the only queen to receive a proper queen's burial. When the king died in 1547, he was buried next to her. Marriage to Henry VIII, May 30, 1536 a.a. October 24, 1537. Death from complications of childbirth. Anne of Cleves. Anne of Cleves was Henry's fourth wife, for only 6 months in 1540, from January 6 to July 9. Anne of Cleves was a German princess. It has been stated that Henry referred to her as a Flanders mare, which may or may not be true. Nevertheless, the label has stuck with Anne. Her pre-contract of marriage with Francis I, Duke of Lorraine, was cited as grounds for an annulment. Anne agreed to this, claiming that the marriage had not been consummated, and because she hadn't resisted the annulment, was given a generous settlement, including Hever Castle, former home of Henry's former in-laws, the Boleyns. She was given the name the king's sister, and became a friend to him and his children until his death. She outlived both the king and his last 2 wives, making her the last of the 6 wives to die. Marriage to Henry VIII, January 6, 1540 a.a. July 9, 1540. Annulled. Catherine Howard. Catherine Howard was Henry's 5th wife between 1540 a 1541, sometimes known as the Rose Without a Thorn. Henry was informed of her alleged adultery with Thomas Culper on November 1, 1541. Marriage to Henry VIII, July 28, 1540 a.a. November 23, 1541. Beheaded. Catherine Parr. Catherine Parr, also spelled Catherine, was the 6th and last wife of Henry VIII, 1543 a 1547. She was the daughter of Sir Thomas Parr of Kendal and his wife Maud Green. Through her father, Catherine was a descendant of John of Gaunt, son of King Edward III. Through John of Gaunt's daughter Joan Beaufort, Countess of Westmoreland, she was Henry's third cousin, once removed. By Henry's paternal descent from another of John of Gaunt's children, John Beaufort, 1st Earl of Somerset, the two were also fourth cousins once removed. Catherine showed herself to be the restorer of Henry's court as a family home for his children. Catherine was determined to present the royal household as a close-knit one in order to demonstrate strength through unity to Henry's opposers. Perhaps Catherine's most significant achievement was Henry's passing of an act that confirmed both Mary's and Elizabeth's line in succession for the throne, despite the fact that they have both been made illegitimate by divorce or remarriage. Such was Henry's trust in Catherine that he chose her to rule as regent while he was attending to the war in France, and in the unlikely event of the loss of his life, she was to rule as regent until 9-year-old Edward came of age. Catherine also has a special place in history as she was the most married Queen of England, having had 4 husbands in all. Henry was her third. She had been widowed twice before marrying Henry. After Henry's death, she married Thomas Seymour, uncle of Edward VI of England, to whom she had formed an attachment prior to her marriage with Henry. She had one child by Seymour, Mary, and died shortly after childbirth. Mary's history is unknown, but she is believed to have died as a toddler. Marriage to Henry VIII, July 12, 1543 January 28, 1547. His death at the age of 55. References